This is Mr. B. We are starting chapter 27 today, and the title of this chapter is Worms and Mollusks. So this is going to be our next two animal groups, the worms and the mollusks. And so you might not know what these are, but we're sure going to find out soon. So we're going to start off with the worms, and our first worm is going to be the flatworms. So to start, we're going to look at what are the defining features of flatworms. And so flatworms, their defining features start with the fact that they're soft and they're flattened, as in would indicate in the name flatworms, that have tissues and internal organ systems, and they are the simplest animals to have 3 embryonic germ layers. So remember the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm, and they have bilateral symmetry and cephalization. So these are our most simple animals to display these 3 characteristics here, which we usually use to classify complex animals. So we could say that they're our simplest complex animal, if you will. And flatworms are known as acollomates, which means they have no column, and a column is simply a fluid-filled body cavity that is lined with tissue derived from the mesoderm, and this is almost going to kind of serve like a defining characteristic between a lot of the worms. Some of the worms are going to have this column, and some are not, so these ones do not have it, so they are acollomates. Remember, anytime you put a in front of something, that means without. And the digestive cavity is the only body cavity in a flatworm, so there's really no other cavities besides just a big area for digestion. And then again, as mentioned before, flatworms have bilateral symmetry. So those are kind of the big defining characteristics of this group, what kind of sets them apart from the rest of the worms. And then here again is our 3 germ layers of a flatworm. We said that they're the simplest animal to have this: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, with their digestive cavity being in the middle, the only one there. And then so form and function in flatworms. So flatworms are thin, and most of their cells are close to the external environment, and so therefore they're going to rely on diffusion for respiration, excretion, and circulation. So since all their cells are close to the outside, their waste and their water and a lot of other things are going to pass just simply right through into their cells from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So diffusion plays a big role with the flatworms. Free-living flatworms are going to have organ systems for digestion, excretion, response, and reproduction. So they will have specialized organ systems to help them carry out all of those essential functions. However, parasitic species are typically going to be simpler in structure than free-living flatworms. It's because parasites basically get inside a host, and then that's where they stay. They don't really need to do too much else. So getting into each one of our essential functions, is going to start with feeding. So flatworms have a digestive cavity. We said that with a single opening through which both food and waste pass. So they're kind of similar to the jellyfish or the cnidarians in that aspect. They have one hole where food comes in and waste goes out. However, a new thing that they have is they have a muscular tube near their mouth called the pharynx. That's how you say that, pharynx. And flatworms will extend their pharynx out of the mouth, and this pharynx will then pump food into the digestive cavity. So they don't just have that single opening to take in the food, they have a little help from this muscular tube called the pharynx. Most parasitic worms, kind of to go along with the feeding, don't need a complex digestive system, and this is simply because they will obtain nutrients from foods that have already been digested by their host. So why do they need to digest food that's already been digested for them? So they just take in the food, and then they don't really need a lot of bells and whistles to help them digest it. They can just take care of it pretty simply. So next one's respiration, circulation, and excretion. So flatworms do not need a circulatory system to transport materials, because they rely on diffusion, and they rely on diffusion to transport oxygen and nutrients to their internal tissues, and they also use it to remove CO2 and other waste from their bodies. So it simply just comes and goes as it needs to, area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. That is how diffusion works. And going along with the respiration and our circulation and excretion, so flatworms will have no gills or respiratory organs. They don't have heart, they don't have blood vessels, and they do not have blood. However, some will have what are known as flame cells, which are specialized cells that will remove excess water from the body. So this will help them kind of take the water out that, again, that may not be needed at the time. And the flame cells will also filter and remove metabolic waste. And again, metabolic waste is just the waste that the cell makes when trying to kind of, again, perform metabolism burn down their nutrients, because that's always going to create some waste, and flame cells will help get rid of those as well. And so response, this is again kind of going to be one of the big defining features for complex animals. In free-living flatworms, a head will enclose what are known as ganglia, and these are groups of nerve cells that control the nervous system. So remember, we had a nerve net in our cnidarians. That was our kind of most basic form of nerves, and now we have what's known as a ganglia, and this is going to be more concentrated to control the nervous system. And two long nerve cords will run from the ganglia along both sides of the body, so they do have long kind of response cells that will help control what the worms do. And then many free-living flatworms will also have eye spots, and these are groups of cells that can detect changes in light. These are again similar to the ocelli that are present in the cnidarians. And most flatworms will have specialized cells that detect external stimuli. So again, if we go up and tap a flatworm right on the tip where its ganglia are at, they will have specialized cells that can detect that. And then the nervous system of the free-living flatworms allow them to gather information from their environment. And again, that's just the function of any nervous system, is to help gain information from the environment to help them survive. And here's kind of what a digestive structure of one of the examples of planaria. As an example of a flatworm, you can see the eye spot, the head. You can see that pharynx coming out of there, which is the big muscular tube to help them take in food. And then here's kind of what their excretory and reproductive and nervous system looks like. You can see there's those two green and blue cords, going down the sides. Those are the two nerve cords. It's actually the two inside gray cords are the two nerve cords, because that's the excretory system and parts of the reproductive system, the blue and the green. So free-living flatworms can now move in two ways, so this group of animals can move. They have cilia on their epidermal cells that help them glide through the water and over the bottom of a stream or pond. And then muscle cells controlled by the nervous system allow them to twist and turn, which is going to allow them to move. And then lastly, the reproduction of this group. Most free-living flatworms are hermaphrodites that reproduce sexually, and a hermaphrodite is an individual that has both male and female reproductive organs. And then two worms will then join in a pair and deliver sperm to each other, basic internal fertilization there, and the eggs are laid in clusters and hatch within a few weeks. Then asexual reproduction takes place by what is known as fission, in which an organism simply splits in two. Each half will grow new parts to become a complete organism. So it's basically some of these worms can literally just split in half, and then the two halves will grow new parts to become new organisms. And parasitic flatworms often have a complex life cycle that will involve both sexual and asexual reproduction. So that's our first part of flatworms. Let me know if you have any questions.